Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around North Idaho addressing a wide variety of subjects. Public Forum features to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
As we continue our extensive series that's titled Hot Talk, Passionate Debate for New Age, which was the theme of the North Idaho College Popcorn Forum Symposium in the spring of 2005. This week and next week we will present two positions, or our guest will present those positions on same-sex marriages. On our first program, our guest will be in support of same-sex marriage, and our guest next week will oppose it. I'm so pleased to welcome to the program Praveen Fernandez, who is a public policy advocate with the Human Rights Campaign in Washington, D.C., which is probably the most leading organization in the country dealing with this particular issue. He works on issues relating to HIV, AIDS, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender health issues, sex education, same-sex marriage, and judicial nominations. Our guest has a very distinguished educational background. He holds a doctorate of jurisprudence from the University of North Carolina College of Law. He also holds a master's in public health from the University of North Carolina School of Public Health, and he has a bachelor's degree in biomedical ethics from Brown University. And the credentials go on. For the lack of time, we will stop there and welcome our distinguished guests. Welcome to our program.
It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Tony.
And we look forward to focusing our attention on this program on your position on same-sex marriages. And with that, I welcome our panel. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho. And next to her is Erna Reinhardt, who is the Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and we will start the questioning at this time with Janelle.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to our part of the country. In order to set the stage for what our conversation is going to be about, would you please define for us the issue, and what is same-sex marriage? How is that different from civil unions or perhaps partnerships? So could you please explain a little bit what we're going to be talking about?
Sure. The struggle for same-sex couples obtaining the right to civil marriage is often conflated with lots of different things, and you're right. When I speak about civil marriage, I'm talking about marriage in the secular sense, so the license that you get at the county clerk's office, not religious marriage. So no one's trying to force any congregation, any religion to solemnize a relationship in any way. We're looking really just for the legal recognition, which is, of course, just the slip of paper that you could get at the county clerk's office, and again, has nothing to do with the religion, although there are some religions that obviously permit same-sex couples to get married in a religious way. The difference between civil unions and domestic partnerships, as they're called in some other states, is civil unions, and the best example of this is Vermont, is an entirely state creation, which means that, Vermont, when it created civil unions, that civil union is a state product, and it only exists in state lines. So, for instance, if a couple becomes party to a civil union in Vermont, let's say that couple goes on a vacation in Florida and gets into a car accident, because that civil union only really exists in Vermont, the partner in that car accident has no assurance that he or she will be able to visit his partner in the hospital. These things that married couples really take for granted, heterosexual married couples, the idea that their relationship is portable, that in some sense their rights and protections, their ability to protect their family is able to exist past state lines. So civil unions and domestic partnerships don't have that benefit. The other thing is that they don't get you federal benefits. Civil unions don't exist on the federal level, so that, for instance, Social Security survivor benefits, if I pay with every paycheck into the Social Security system, if I die before retirement, my partner isn't able to get Social Security survivor benefits, versus the fact that if I were married, I'd be able to provide that measure of protection, and those benefits wouldn't just revert to the government.
Thank you.
Reinhardt.
Welcome, Praveen, to the show. We're lucky to have you here, and we're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here. Explain to our viewers, are there places in the world where same-sex marriages are recognized?
There are. Full same-sex marriages are currently recognized in Canada, in the Netherlands, and in Belgium. So those are the three countries that do that. Spain is on the cusp of permitting same-sex marriage there as well. So in those countries, there are full same-sex marriages, which are equivalent to heterosexual marriages.
And then also explain, in the United States, are there some states where same-sex marriage is honored?
Currently, just Massachusetts. Massachusetts is currently honoring same-sex marriages on a daily basis. So that's the only state.
Great. Tony?
In dealing with some of the questions from the opposition, which is our responsibility to do, and
Sure.
you certainly have heard all of these that we're going to mention, but those who oppose same-sex marriages have several arguments, and one is that what they consider the sanctity of marriage should be reserved to heterosexual couples, but they don't oppose, a lot of them don't oppose what we call domestic partnerships in California or civil unions in Vermont. And they also, in their argument, indicate some of them from a religious perspective and some not. Your opponent on this issue next week will say it's not from a religious viewpoint, but anyway, let me start with that, and you've already answered partly with Janelle about the legal benefits that aren't there, but let's say from a philosophical viewpoint, or from a theological viewpoint, or even a constitutional one, and from a historical perspective, the argument is that marriage throughout history in countries has been confined to, in most cases, between a man and woman. Your organization and you, how do you respond to these kinds of counter arguments on the other side?
Well, first, I guess I'll address the first part of your question, which is really about, aside from the benefits, which I told you there's some concrete inequalities and disparities and harms that befall gay and lesbian families when they aren't able to marry. But besides the benefits, there is also a cultural resonance to that. I mean, some opponents, very good-natured and good-hearted opponents, have said, well, why are you fighting for marriage? Because that's such a loaded term. It means so much to so many people. It's attached to all these associations. And I often feel like in their very question, the answers are right there. The truth is we're fighting for that because we grew up in those same communities. We've grown up in the same families. We watch the same television shows. We listen to the same corny love songs in junior high school. Marriage is meaningful for us, too. We grew up in this society. And so for us, marriage is a powerful term. And it does carry with it a lot of very resonant themes in it, and it certainly is the paradigm for what it means to have a loving, long-term relationship. With respect to your second question, which I take to sort of be a question evoking tradition, I think that the traditional argument or the argument that we're trying to change marriage needs to be prefaced with a discussion that marriage is already a work in progress. Marriage has gone through a lot of changes. This is the latest in a lot of in a long string of contentious changes to marriage. I mean, one only needs to look at the rights of women within marriages in the last 100 years legally. And women for the last 100 years were largely treated as property in marriages. And if you look at divorce law, if you look at other things, if you look at what women could bring into marriage, what women could take out, or even sexual assault, marital rape statutes. I mean, there's some profound changes to the way that we have understood the rights of parties to a marriage, even just the man-woman marriage that we're talking about. And so this is the latest to many changes. Certainly in the 60s, there was a case that went all the way up to the Supreme Court and was decided in Loving v. Virginia, which determined that interracial marriages couldn't be prevented on the state level by anti-miscegenation statutes. And people at that time said, how can you change marriage? This is just nature. This is just God's plan. And we had a very contentious discussion at that point that was ended by the Loving v. Virginia case, where someone stepped in, and at this point, this was the Supreme Court that said, no, the state cannot prohibit couples of different races from getting married.
A lot of southern states had the anti-miscegenation laws that made it a felony for if you had as much as 1/8 racial heritage, say that was not Caucasian, you could not marry. And there was a case with a couple from Virginia. I want to take you to another place, and I'm just sorry we only have 30 minutes, and I'll go back to the panel. But this morning in our presentation that you had, along with your opponent, Mr. Dwight Duncan, who's on your next week, I was interested and a little bit surprised, and I'm partly playing the devil's advocate, but not necessarily completely. You both seem to agree that the argument for same-sex marriages was not necessarily based on love. And I remember Mr. Duncan saying for heterosexual couples that it's not just love, there are other important reasons, and you seem to agree to some extent. But let me put it this way. If you have policy, you have law from the state itself that says that even though two consenting adults are truly deeply in love, be they heterosexual or homosexual, that when the state will put up policies that could affect that love, that is, at least not letting that couple be together in the same capacity of maybe a fulfilling of the love. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, does the policy not block and somehow affect love? So isn't that a factor that should be? In other words, does the state have any right to interfere with two human beings having deeply loved? The Declaration of Independence talks about the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. And I would argue the pursuit of happiness can be maximized through human relationships and love. So just let you respond to that. I was a little surprised by that comment from both of you this morning.
I think I might not have understood your question. I'm sorry. I think I was responding to something where someone said, are you just saying that the state should recognize any loving relationships? And the person in the audience had said, well, wouldn't this lead to polygamy? What if you said, well, 3 people loved each other equally? And I was responding more to that. I'm not saying that love isn't a central component of marriage and that the state doesn't have a role in facilitating or recognizing loving relationships. I would argue that love is a huge component of marriage, and it certainly is a central thing. But I was responding to the argument that if it's just love, well, then what's to prevent 3 loving, and I think I answered that, which is that they're a complicated, separate set of issues why we don't, permit polygamy.
In your answer, you made it very, very clear that there are lines to be drawn, that you weren't supporting polygamy or some other things that have been charged by the opposition. But I just wanted to get your statement about the depth of love and its importance.
Yep.
Janelle Burke.
Over time, states have regulated matters that had to do with the family. There are some now who believe that a constitutional amendment is necessary. What is your position with regard to that? Or do you think that action by the states is sufficient?
So you're speaking about a federal constitutional
Yes,
amendment at this
correct.
point, not a state constitutional amendment?
That's correct.
Well, I think for a couple of different reasons, I think a federal constitutional amendment is just bad policy. I think that you can actually be against same-sex marriage and still think that a federal constitutional amendment is bad policy. In a lot of ways, it would be unprecedented. For one, since the Bill of Rights, the amendment process has only been used to expand rights. So there's been a steady historic expansion of rights, extending the right to vote, doing certain things, striking down slavery. It has been a steady expansion of democratic principles and rights. This would be going in the opposite direction. It would be restricting rights. The only other amendment that did that was prohibition, which, of course, was a rank failure in terms of public policy. And so we know the outcome of that. So I just think it's really bad policy. I also think that states' rights folks should be up in arms about the federal constitutional amendment, because the truth is, marriage has always been regulated on the state level. The age to get married in states is different. The age to get married in West Virginia is different from New York, which is different from Idaho, which is different from Iowa. And that's always been conceived of in the law as the province of the states. So putting that in the Constitution just seems incredibly unwise to me.
Reinhardt.
One of the issues that I think it's confused in this discussion is that of parenting and children. And I know that your opponent this morning spoke very profoundly that marriage should only focus on a father and a mother, should only include a father and a mother, and that children should only grow up in an environment where there is a father and a mother. Could you speak a little bit about your feelings towards that opinion?
Sure. I would say first, as a preface to that we allow a lot of couples to get married who are never going to have children. We allow 2 85-year-old heterosexuals to get married, not with the premise by the law that they're going to have children or bring children into the world. We allow infertile couples to get married all the time. So children are just one component. But second, with respect to children, I think children need 2 loving parents and benefit from that. Certainly 2 loving parents. I'm not sure that that they necessarily need a mother and a father. I think children flourish when they have 2 loving parents. I also know that there are a lot of brave single parents who are doing great jobs with the difficult task of raising a child. And they do find, other role models. They find, the opposite sex role models all the time. This is happening with lots of brave heterosexual couples that for one reason or the other find themselves raising children alone. And so, Children need love, yes. Children need support, yes. But that can come in lots of different forms. There are a lot of same-sex couples that are currently raising children, and I think it's interesting to note that the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Family Physicians have both have positions, formal policy positions, in support of same-sex parenting. So these are the people we trust with raising our children, pediatricians, et cetera, that don't see a problem with that inherent to having same-sex parents. I think that's important.
Excellent.
As a political scientist, I can never do a show without some legal aspects. Janelle is guilty of that also as an attorney. The argument on federalism that we've partly touched on under Article 4 of the Constitution, full faith and credit relationship between states, and under the 10th Amendment, and certain things reserved to the states, in this discussion has indicated that the great majority of things that deal with marriage and family law is state. Mm-hmm. But isn't it correct that both under the Article 4 and comparing that with 14th Amendment, and you're an attorney, and that's why I'm doing this, under the Equal Protection Clause, there's a limit, though, however far a state can go in regulating things such as marriage. If it violates a right, that's how the interracial marriage bans were eliminated, because under the 14th Amendment, the court in Lovey v. Virginia said, states, you have power, but you don't have the power to deny an interracial marriage because it denies the 14th Amendment right of equal protection due process. So is that the same argument that you would use in relation to same-sex marriage, is that you would not leave that to the states? Do you give it the same level of argument that interracial marriage does on the 14th Amendment?
Well, we're not a litigation group. The Human Rights Campaign is not a litigation group, so we really haven't been in that position. We haven't so much been advocating for same-sex marriage as we have been fighting against a constitutional amendment. So, our position has always been, we are, of course, in support of same-sex marriage, but we haven't really been litigating, aggressively on that. Equal protection, you are absolutely right. Loving v. Virginia was based on a federal constitutional challenge that implicated both equal protection and fundamental due process, because there's a question about whether there's a fundamental due process right to marry, and there's other case law too which said that prisoners could marry, or people who couldn't pay for the filing fees for their past divorce could marry. There definitely are cases where it said that there are limits. The federal Constitution establishes limits to the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause on what a state can do to regulate marriage. Yes, you're right.
Then my follow-up would be that if we had left marriage completely to the states, there'd be some southern states today that would not allow interracial marriages. If we leave same-sex marriage completely to the states, 11 states have just responded by saying no to it. So I know where your organization is at this point, but will they not be almost forced at some point to say, if we leave to the states, it may only be Massachusetts with marriage law?
Are you asking me whether I think it will just stay, whether we'll stay a patchwork of different jurisdictions, or whether at some point a court will step in?
That you're a very prominent organization, the Human Rights Campaign. And I know what you're saying, where you're at this point.
Yeah.
But at some point, won't you be almost forced to say, in your opposition, obviously, to a U.S. constitutional amendment, which would really prohibit it, that once that argument may be over, does one not have to go to court to use the present Constitution to say states may not have the final say?
I mean, I think it's entirely possible that after we see a patchwork development, let's say the constitutional amendment doesn't happen, after we see patchwork development, there might be legal challenges. I mean, there are legal challenges on many things, and we'll have to see when that day comes. I don't want to speculate on that, but there's certainly great litigators who make great cases, and certainly the principles are applicable. But I'll wait for that when it's. It's
not fair for me to ask you your organization to take a position they haven't taken yet. So thank you.
Yeah.
Very much.
So when that day comes.
Sure. Janelle Burke.
Well, as Tony just indicated, there are some states who have adopted some kind of constitutional amendment, although they're not uniform in their language, I would take it. However, a great deal of fear sometimes precedes things. So what does your organization do in order to enlighten people as to what, number one, the issues are, and number two, what some of the true facts are, and also to deal with the questions that people have?
Sure. On the statewide level, and you're mentioning these statewide referenda and ballot initiatives that were on the ballots this last election, we've worked with local groups, and there are great local groups in every state, and that do just a great job. And we've worked with them to help, sort of give them any information and support that they need. We try to let the local group take the lead, because we certainly don't want to seem like a national group imposing, our agenda. And the truth is, there are LGBT groups in every state. I mean, according to the last census data and the Human Rights Campaign data, there are LGBT individuals in 99.3% of the counties of America. So it's a pretty stunning statistic. And we work with groups like that to make sure that they have the polling information, the talking points that they might need, and then to develop anything that they need. I guess our primary message would be that there really isn't anything to be frightened of. For the vast majority of people, life will continue as it always has been. Heterosexual couples will still be married. Marriages have happened in Massachusetts for about a year, and there have been no locusts, no pieces of the sky falling in. And for the vast majority of the population, life has continued as normal. But for a small segment of the population, they've all of a sudden been able to protect their families in unprecedented ways. And so for them, it's been much brighter, sort of since then.
And the second part to my question, although we talked earlier about how the government might discriminate against individuals, what about some of the rights that people would have in private companies as a result of the possibility of marriage?
Oh, interesting. It's funny because this has been someplace where the private sector has led. It's really amazing. We don't have a federal anti-discrimination law that includes sexual orientation in this day and age. It's still legal for me to be fired in about 35 states, based solely on my sexual orientation. So even if I'm doing a good job and I'm not bringing any personal aspect to work, I can be legally fired in 35 states just for being gay. I can't be fired because I'm not Caucasian. I can't be fired based on my religion, my race, etc., but I can be fired based on my sexual orientation. However, the majority of Fortune 500 companies have realized this just doesn't make sense. We want the best employees, and if it doesn't interfere with your job, why would we have that? We just want the best people in our workplace. So the majority of Fortune 500 companies actually have anti-discrimination policies that include sexual orientation, so ones that prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation. So they've led. In some of these ballot initiative states, there's some concern because some of them are worded so broadly that there's a concern that some employers might be loath to really extend things like health benefits. Some companies have decided to extend partner health care benefits to same-sex couples, and there's concern in some of these states that might be clouded by some of the statewide referenda, because you're right to point out they've been drafted in many different shapes, some of them very, very ambitious.
Praveen, what some of the critics may say is, why do you need this marriage? Why is that so important to you? Why not just live together and leave it at that? So my question is to you, maybe if you can either share a story or just convey to the viewers, our viewers, why is this worth fighting for, and why is it important to those individuals that are in that lifestyle?
I don't know. I'm thinking of something the last year. I get the great privilege of going to a lot of events done by the Human Rights Campaign across the country, and I met this couple, Frank and Gary. I won't put last names in because I don't have their permission. Frank and Gary, who were both veterans of the war and had served their country, have paid into the tax system, and have been in this relationship that's 30 years old. And they're reaching retirement age, or I guess they're already retirement age, but they're thinking of things in their life, and they've pledged, they've had a relationship that's longer than most of the heterosexual marriages I know. They've served our country, they want to get married in the way their siblings have. And before they die, it was sort of moving. They spoke about their need before they die to have some sort of acknowledgement of this lifelong relationship they had. And if one of them has to go to a nursing home, they want the right to be able to be placed in adjoining rooms or the same rooms, which are rights that married couples, take for granted every day. And they're thought for the first time they might be separated because there's no right to be an unmarried couple and be placed in the same room in a facility. This is just one of many poignant stories, I think, of people who have a real yearning for these relationships that already exist and have existed for many years to have some sort of acknowledgement, on the terms that they want them to have.
When you look at this issue and a lot of other issues, fear plays a role oftentimes. It's often been said by many experts that one of the challenges to the whole question of civil rights and human rights is that some people fear the unknown or differences. What does your organization do and others to try to address this obstacle that is part of the challenge?
Well, one of the things that we do is we have a coming out project, which encourages people in a safe and educated way to come out on National Coming Out Day, which is in October. Because one of the things we've seen is people are less frightened of this once they know someone who's gay or lesbian. The truth is, a lot of this fear is theoretical fear. It's easy to be frightened of a person who's of a different race than you, or to be frightened of a gay or lesbian until you actually meet them. I think that one of the things that desegregation did, in the school system, is for the first time ensured that lots of people who were white interacted with people who were of a different racial background than them. It's harder to fear something that's known and something with which you have daily contact. I'm hoping that that's true for the gay and lesbian community too. As you know that we are your friends, your neighbors, your siblings, that fear will erode over time because you realize we've been in your workplace, we've been in your school, we're the people that you were on a softball team with or on a basketball team with, and so, we're there. That's one of the things we're doing to address that, hopefully over time.
Another argument that your opponents have, and they used the last election to show that in 11 states, either a constitutional amendment was that state constitution or some statute by referendum or initiative, I should say, in all, even Oregon, which is quite liberal, that they voted against same-sex marriages. How do you answer the opponents that should this be decided by a majority vote or should it be decided based on, say, a constitutional question?
That's hard. I don't really want to wade into that. One of the things that was difficult for me, and that's something that I take solace in, is, okay, so maybe the majority right now feels that way, but I'm sort of confident. I'm an optimist that I think that human nature and American society is all about eventually embracing diversity and pluralism, and it's about learning about civilization. I take solace from sort of being a person of color and looking at the struggle for interracial couples to have the ability to marry. A year after the Loving v. Virginia decision was handed down by the Supreme Court, the New York Times publicized the results of a Gallup poll that asked American citizens across the country, do you approve of or disapprove of marriages across race lines? And 72% of the people in 1968, a year after the decision, disapproved of interracial marriages.
On that note, I have to bring the permanent conclusion. Unfortunately, the clock wins. Thank you so much, Praveen Fernandez, for being with us. It was great having you on the program, and good luck to you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back next week with the other side of the issue of same-sex marriage. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.